Good afternoon and a very warm welcome from West London, from St Mary's, Perivale, for our Sunday afternoon event. It isn't a concert today, it's a lecture, and it's of particular interest to anyone who's interested in the piano world and in the careers of all these wonderful pianists who come to entertain us here at St Mary's, Perivale. We're delighted to have Christopher Elton, who's a very distinguished pedagogue, emeritus professor at the Academy, having taught many of the the leading British pianists of the moment and leading pianists from all over the world. And he's judged and been on the jury in most of the big competitions. And so we have someone who really knows the competition world from the inside, and he's going to talk on international piano competitions, love 'em or hate 'em. And at the end of the afternoon, we might have a show of hands or something like that. Anyway, it gives me huge pleasure to welcome Christopher Elton to give his lecture. A big round of applause, please.
Thank you, Hugh, and thank you for coming. This is not my normal concert where, or even my normal lecture where, the perils of jogging and turning around to see what's happening at the same time and falling flat and tripping and very heavy fall. Anyway, not the best thing for a pianist to do. However, if I ever had by any chance had the intention perhaps of sitting down at the piano and demonstrating how to play the fugue of the Hammerklavier or the Liszt Mephisto Waltz or Petrushka in such a way as to demonstrate how you would definitely win a piano competition, then this gives me the obvious let-out clause. Needless to say, I never had such an intention. So there's a well-known joke. The ambitious pianist who seeks to perform in New York's most prestigious venue, the Carnegie Hall, asks, "How do I get to Carnegie Hall?" and receives the answer. You take the number 1 A or D line subway to Columbus Circle, and you walk three blocks down 7th Avenue. The opposite joke is the man who wants to hear a concert at Carnegie Hall, sees someone with a violin and says, "How do I get to Carnegie Hall?" and gets a one-word answer, "Practice." For many aspiring pianists and instrumentists and singers, the question of how to get to this perceived perhaps pinnacle of the performing stages of the world is one that constantly besets them. And often the route that seems most likely to arrive at that goal quickly is that of winning a major competition. Of course, there are many examples of pianists who've done that. You look at Ashkenazy, Martha Argerich, Maurizio Pollini, Mario Pariah, Radu Lupu, Sokolov, all won huge competitions. But surely these great artists would have made it, if not quite as quickly perhaps, without these successes. There are also examples of highly successful pianists who've had major careers through other routes. I suppose one brilliant example of a huge international success who never won or ever did a major senior world competition is Lang Lang. I did hear him when I was on the jury of the junior Ettlingen category A under 15 competition. It's a big international junior competition which he won, but I don't think that's an automatic path to Carnegie Hall. Speaking only from first-hand knowledge of my own students, and most successful ones, Benjamin Grover only entered one competition in his life, a BBC Young Musician, when he was 11 years old. Yevgeny Sudbin had no major competition track record. Joanna McGregor never entered any competition apart from our Young Concert Artists Trust, which is a competition, but not quite the same. On the other hand, José Fegali certainly had his career given a very firm establishment by winning the gold medal in the Clyburn competition in 1987. And Freddie Kempf, also his career was certainly given a big boost by, in inverted commas only, because some people thought he should have done better. I'm not sure about that, but that was a rumor. But he only got third prize in the Tchaikovsky competition. And there have been many others who had this success and whose careers rapidly dimmed. I think if you're asked to name all the winners of Leeds after Pariah, Lupu, and Alexeyev, you might be hard put to name all of them or many of them, or recent winners of Tchaikovsky. And you must wonder what happened to them all. I guess the simple reason is not that juries failed to spot the great talent in those years, but simply because great talent does not present itself neatly packaged every 4 years for some particular competition. Andrew Schiff once said to me, and no doubt he said the same to many people, Dame Fanny says, I had a successful career because of Leeds. I say I had a successful career in spite of Leeds. He won 5th prize in the year that Alexeyev won 1st and Ishida, Mitsuko Ishida won 2nd. Nevertheless, clearly competitions are a route into concert opportunities, and once you're there, it's up to you to make the most of that opportunity. I'd like to start with the main criticism levelled at competitions, the whole concept, that they're essentially inartistic, that artistry and competition cannot live happily together. I hope I can discuss and get this out of the way as quickly as possible. As in most things, there are arguments on both sides, and different people find a different balance between those arguments. This doubt over the whole competition of a competition may sound, and probably is, over-idealistic and philosophical, but it's an important issue. I think it is no exaggeration to say that I and most of my professional colleagues have a kind of love-hate relationship with competitions. We detest or love them to greater or lesser degrees, sometimes depending on the results our students achieve. I think they have a genuinely very important part to play for aspiring professional pianists, whether we like it or not, and I think we need to accept this. And often when they're negative or damaging in their influences and effects, this is more often the fault of the teacher, the parent, or the student, not intrinsically of the competition system. At first sight, it may seem appalling that a musical competition could ever seem a competitive event on a kind of par with some Olympic event. Though I'm sure we've all come across individuals who seem to take this attitude, and with that sometimes comes the wish to play faster and louder than ever, than any possible rival. But all this high-minded and idealistic thought seems totally to ignore the fact that the musical profession is and always will be fundamentally highly competitive. If you remove competitions, it's no less competitive. There are few places at the top, and the selection process is going to be massively difficult, and to stay there even more demanding. 50 years ago, agents took on that role. They attended debut concerts, they listened to broadcasts. Now, though fortunately not always, many, especially the big ones, wait till the new star winner emerges and then compete, take him on or her on when they are clearly marketable and profitable. Some may cynically say that they try to wait and jump on the bandwagon. This may be unfair, and it's not to suggest that they don't fill a very, very useful role, but it's performed in a very different way. There is always going to be a selection process, and so the idea that you involve really skilled, experienced, distinguished musicians in that process surely seems perfectly justifiable. But with this involvement comes the essential need the process is visibly fair, honest, and free of any hint of corruption or favoritism. This is a matter I will return to much later. So do away with competitions and the whole profession is no less competitive. Before I go any further, can I say two things which I regard as so important? The first is even the most. Of course, pianists think, how do I win a competition? But maybe it's equally important, or more so, to think, what happens if I do win the competition, especially a major one? There's no point in winning this unless you're sure you have the repertoire, the physical and mental stamina to take full advantage of being thrust in the spotlight. You will have many concerts, and at every one, the expectation is that you will play, as well as the broadcast that people heard of you playing during the competition. The higher the expectations, the greater the disappointments, and the more damaging to an emerging career. Many will be only too happy to label you a failure. I'd be the first to admit that when Jose Fagali won the Clyburn, I think it was 85 actually, he was not emotionally or mentally quite prepared for what lay ahead of him. He was wonderfully gifted and a real performer, had a relatively small repertoire, and had so many interests apart from playing the piano. Fascinating. Suddenly, he had more than 200 concerts in the space of 3 years. I can also accept that at the time I was much younger and less experienced, and I don't think I'd ever had a student win such a prestigious competition. So perhaps I also hadn't given enough thought to what happens to him if he wins. Second thing is, please never enter a competition just to see if I can pass to the second round. You must be prepared to go all the way to the final. Not to do so is unprofessional, it's disrespectful both to the competition and to your fellow competitors. If you pass to a round for which you're not fully prepared, not only do you risk making a fool of yourself, and people will remember, but you also have dishonestly, I believe, robbed another worthy competitor who was prepared for that opportunity. There was a case in an early London international piano competition where one of the 3 announced concerto soloists finalists withdrew overnight after the semi-final result. Now, I don't know why. Maybe he didn't feel well. Maybe he wasn't ready. Anyway, the suspicion was that he wasn't ready with his concerto, but maybe that's untrue, unfair. Quick emergency jury discussions the next morning, and the next person in the voting was Antti Sirala. So he was phoned up, and he was on a taxi on the way to Heathrow Airport. So there was still time for him to turn around and come and play in the competition, and he got first prize. But you know, if he'd been 2 hours later, he'd have missed that opportunity for somebody, because somebody wasn't actually ready for the place they were felt to have deserved for the final. So quite apart from the gains of winning a competition, there are other pluses, of course. And not least is the experience of pacing yourself against your peers and moving hopefully into ever more challenging and more international settings. We all know of a player who may be the best in his teacher's class, or the whole school, or the whole city, or the whole country, or in a whole international perspective. And this is a way to find out, not just by seeing whether you came first or didn't pass the first round, but by listening to others, by listening to them, trying objectively to see maybe why they passed, even if you don't think they deserved it, but why you think they passed, what is good in their playing that you realize isn't quite there in your playing, but also being able to recognize qualities in your playing that they maybe don't have. It's very important to be self-critical, but it's equally important to appreciate one's own strengths. To digress, I love the story of Harold Craxton, who was the great kind of doyen of the piano faculty of the Royal Academy of Music, and I guess the 40s, 50s particularly. His young daughter once said, Daddy, are you the best piano teacher in Britain? He said, well, you can't really say, you know. Are you the best piano teacher in London? Well, if I was the best teacher in London, I might be the best in Britain. No, you can't. There are lots of teachers. Anyway, this questioning went on, gradually narrowing down. In the end, he was prepared to concede that he was the best teacher in Kidderport Avenue ever since Mrs. Smith at number 46 had died. Well, the same kind of thing might apply to young pianists who seek the ever-expanding international world of wonderful fellow pianists. The next gain, the opportunity to learn and perform new repertoire. And with this consideration comes the need in programming to balance the inclusion always of some new repertoire, but other well-tried. But life is too short to go around playing party pieces repeatedly, increasingly well. I was on the pre-selection jury for all the pre-selection stages of the Clyburn competition recently. And a pianist who I know very well and I've heard before, and who actually has already won a major competition, came for his 30-minute program, and he played 2 works that I heard him play 3 years ago. And they weren't better than then. I think they've gone stale. He didn't actually pass the pre-selection, but on paper he must have looked an absolute certainty. I was once on a competition where a pianist came and played, I think in the second round. You often have the chance to talk to the jury afterwards and see what they think of your playing. And there was one juror who'd heard this same pianist play the same program exactly in 2 different competitions. And when the pianist asked him what he thought of her playing, he simply said, well, it was better than Busoni, but not as good as Hong Kong. That was all he would tell her. Any good teacher which you have will, of course, advise on the balance of trying out new works and playing well-tried and tested repertoire. Another advantage, the need for a distinct target. We all need some important event, a definite target to aim for, a deadline. Concerts offer this, and not least here, but they cannot always be produced to order. Not to ever undervalue the actual opportunities of getting on a stage and performing. Amongst disadvantages, not inconsiderable time and expense. Expense of travel, entering, and even a relatively small competition can easily involve at least a week away. So competitions can become a distraction and an interruption from the primary aim of the coherent development of a student. And again, the disadvantage is repertoire, again, because relying too much on old repertoire means you don't develop. You've got, 5, 6 years of really hard study, and that's when you will build the key repertoire that will last you through your lifetime. And one little thing, also sometimes people try to think they have to produce a performance that pleases the jury. I mean, it's ridiculous. How do you know what the jury like? But I do hear students and also teachers sometimes of how to play for a competition to win. I certainly accept there are many things you can do to make pretty sure you won't win, but there's no one way to program a path to competition success other than the 2 vital prongs of great talent, extremely hard work, and one third prong, which is confidence. Without confidence, I think you cannot play really well. Now on to the actual choice of competition and application. Someone said to me some years ago, can you name 3 towns in Italy that don't have an international piano competition? Well, it's a slight exaggeration, but not total exaggeration. Most of you, of course, will be able to research the options, choose the most appropriate, and again, the most reliable and helpful person to advise, and this is going to be your teacher. Your teacher will be skilled at making such judgments, respect their advice, even if at the end you choose to disregard it. I would add, though, and I'm being serious again, whole thing's serious, basically. There's one category of people associated with especially junior competitions I would really want to address seriously and quite passionately, because I care about these young pianists so much. Don't get angry with me. I hope I say this with understanding. And I am referring to parents. It is so hard being the parent of a really gifted pianist, especially, as is so often, when you're not professionally in music. I think it's true to say that behind almost every successful pianist, there is a father or a mother, usually the mother, who makes huge sacrifices to support and encourage. But also they are the ones who make sure the child does practice enough. I'm sure I wouldn't have practiced enough. Maybe I didn't, but I would have practiced even less without bullying from my mother. But such support can easily cross the dividing line into damaging over-pressurizing. It risks over-anxiety in young people and increases the sense of failure when things don't go well. Again, because she's been quite long dead, I can speak from first-hand experience. I had a wonderfully supportive mother, but in her efforts to make me strive for ever greater success, she actually imposed too much pressure. If ever, and it wasn't so seldom, I didn't actually win a competition or receive stellar marks in an exam, my first thought was, how do I tell my mother? And if I did win a major prize in a competition, she would be very pleased, and then the next day she'd say, well, of course, it's not as good as winning Leeds. So always consider that for performers, confidence is of such critical importance. Unduly harsh criticism or pressure can erode this. Now to you and your competition adventure, and much of what I'm saying may seem so obvious. Treat the whole application process with the greatest respect. Read all the information. And some of the repertoire demands are so complex, you almost need a kind of slide rule to work out what you can play when and what the timing for this is and whether you need to do this or that. What's permissible? You need to double check any things you can repeat in different rounds. Some prohibit anything in the video submission ever being played again. Some insist only on complete works. That presumably prohibits the selection of Chopin preludes. But does it prevent playing Jardin sous la pluie or Reflet dans l'eau from Debussy Image? If so, if you don't know, ask. Be scrupulous about timings. They can be rigidly enforced on the day, honestly observant. If you're performing with the tiniest fear of that dreaded bell ringing and interrupting your performance, you're not going to play your best, and you might play even faster. And again, it's not fair to other competitors who do abide by the rules. Look carefully to see if the competition affords flexibility in changing your original submission of programs. I had a student who submitted a program right at the application process and for a competition 9 months later, and when they sought to change one of their later rounds was told you can't do it. Some permit a short period after being notified of acceptance, some even later, but never after the program goes to print. Bear in mind that competition organisers need to be absolutely consistent in demanding compliance to the rules, even for the student or the jury chairperson, or maybe especially. Finally, try not to send your application, as most do, in the final day or two before the deadline. It is so easy to run up against a computer or download problem, find that yet another reference is required, or a certification of your recording, or find that your passport is at home and you need a photocopy and it's back at your parents' house or whatever, or an official document validating your degrees. Give yourself time for any little hiccups. Almost every competition worth its salt these days requires a submission of normally video, occasionally audio, often a prescribed repertoire. Having been on quite a lot of pre-selection juries, I can tell you the actual technical quality of recording is actually extraordinarily high these days. So if you submit a recording made at home or on your phone, I'm afraid you're already seriously damaging your chances of proceeding. And I'm not yet talking about musical qualities. This year, the Clyburn competition had 388 applications. A first jury reduced that to 143. I, with 4 colleagues, of course not consulting, listened to those online, and then we selected 72 to come and play live in Fort Worth. We spent a week out there listening to their 30-minute recitals, and at the end of that, we got to the 30 actually to the competition. So 388 came down to 30, which is less than 1 in 12. The selection procedure for the Warsaw competition, Chopin competition, is in a different way, equally protracted. Of course you want to send an excellent application and submission, but please, if you know deep down it's not really up to standard, you'd be ill-advised even to submit your application. Remember, the competition organisers, once they've heard a really substandard performance, will actually probably remember you and can, even subconsciously, dismiss a future application unduly rapidly. Realise that slips and technical blemishes that you might get away with in a live performance by your charisma, by the occasion, sound far, far worse on a recording. Be aware of repertoire that really is not good to play on a brief submission or as part of a short program in a competition round. I'm thinking works like Funérailles, Ballet d'Obermann, where the first kind of 6 pages are all slow. It's not good. Certain works, I think Chopin's First Ballade is a kind of kiss of death piece because so many people play it, so many people teach it, and it's easy to kind of shouldn't have a kind of prejudged idea. I think Chopin, on the whole, is such a wonderful composer, but and like Mozart, very difficult. Something a bit off the beaten track is certainly good, very good, so long as there's not too much of it. Juries also need something standard to have as a kind of benchmark to compare you with other people. Think very carefully about the order of your submission, which normally is free. Unless it's compulsory, if you've got to play a Bach playing fugue, I would suggest you don't necessarily begin with that. Begin with something more catchy. Janicek Sonata, Granados, Requiebros, Scriabin Fifth Sonata. Something which is more individual and ear-grubbing. And then by the time they get to your Bach playing fugue, they're already interested. And one more reminder that the first few minutes of your submission need to be flawless and as interesting as possible. Juries are diligent, but if you have 200 performances to hear and there are clearly issues in the first minute, it's only human to be less inclined to persevere to see if it gets better. I can tell a true story of a student of mine who sent in his YouTube recording for a certain very, very prestigious international competition. And it was possible to check on YouTube how many views it had had. It had 1 view per 12 seconds. I know, I heard it. There was no disaster in those 12 seconds. So it was simply accessed in order to demonstrate that it had been viewed. They obviously didn't realize how much could be found out. Not very impressive behavior, and this was a very big competition. Which leads me to one other fact of life that I don't like, but need to be realistic about. For the bigger competitions, the CV is almost as important as the submission. If you're 25 and there's no evidence of appreciable success, be it in previous competitions or press reviews or recordings or concerts, then the application may receive not that scant, may receive more scant attention than it deserves. It can almost lead to a catch-22 situation. How can I enter, let alone win, a major competition when I've not won a competition? So all the more important first to have entered and tried to show some success in small, even junior competitions. It can all feel very unfair. Now let's have a little break from me playing. I've got 1 or 2 recordings which are all recordings live from major international competitions. I will say, perhaps, well, the first one I'm not going to say who it is, but I think it's fairly obvious. And this is Chopin competition. This is the first Chopin Etude, Opus 10, number 1. This is the first thing this particular, I think, what, an 18, 19-year-old played in the competition. Well, if you're on a jury and you hear that, you think, oh, this is quite good. It's phenomenal. Do any of you instantly realise who that is? Martha Argerich, yes. Martha Argerich, yeah. It's Martha Argerich, and it's this child of nature, this phenomenal talent. And it's not just technically good, it's actually so subtle too. And in fact, like most of these examples, it's not totally without the odd tiny, tiny blemish or slip, which is totally unimportant. It's a really one of the finest performances I've ever heard of that piece. Incidentally, it comes in at 1 minute 53 seconds. I was in the jury of Ettlingen competition, and there were many, I have to say, Chinese pianists who played this piece, and one or two of them managed to break the 1 minute 50 barrier, but they didn't play it as well as that. But accurately, not even up there. Now the next, in case you think I think that pretty technique is all that matters, well, of course that is much more than that. Here's another performance. This is from, I think, the year of Martha Argerich. I think it was 66, was it? Something like that. This is from a performance in the 1969 Leeds International Competition, and it's Radio Lupu. It's the Schumann Humoresque. And the opening 2 pages feature this very intimate Schumann Innigkeit, a very moving, and then there's a witty comes next. So here, a few minutes of Radu playing the Humoresque. And again, of course, Radu won the competition. Sadly, it was Radu passed away over this last week. For me, one of the great artists, pianists of this century, I think. A wonderful, wonderful player. And that, I think, has just superb playing. That opening takes your breath away. It makes you want to shed a tear, and then suddenly there's wit. The next example is more an example of fantastic technical brilliance and often of delicacy and imagination. Incidentally, Argerich was 65, I believe. And this is Ashkenazi playing in Tchaikovsky competition in 58, and it's Liszt for Folle. well might they clap. I thought the last 2 pages are absolutely wonderful. The delicacy, the wit, and to play that in a competition. Yeah. Now, 2 short excerpts. The only one of my students I'm bringing in here, from Freddie Kemp in the 1968 Tchaikovsky competition. One is an excerpt, again, I'm not picking anything virtuosic, I think a very beautiful excerpt from the 3rd Piano Concerto of Rachmaninoff, the end of the cadenza. First movement. And something very contrasting, again, Freddie in the same competition, the wit of a small section of the Tchaikovsky scherzo. So I remember graduation day at the Academy in, what was it, 1998. Graduation day at the Academy. He had to apologise that Freddie Kemp couldn't be there in person to accept his awards because he was in the Tchaikovsky competition. A good reason for absence, I think. Now, issue of repertoire was a critical thing. So whether the round is 5 minutes, 15, 25, 75, the choice of repertoire is crucial, especially in the shorter rounds. One clear problem I think we all face is whether, in choosing repertoire, is where do I put my strongest works? There's an argument for both. Do you keep the best for last, and the basis of the competition is going to be stiffer then? As the competition, as a number of competitors passes from 50 to 24 to maybe 12, you need to have your strongest piece to have a chance. But on the other hand, there's the obvious risk that if you keep all your strongest repertoire to the end, you may never play it. Because you've never got there. You might not have even got to the second round. Do bear in mind the poor jury. I'm sure it's very hard for you to feel sympathy for the jury, sitting comfortably listening and staying in a very nice hotel while competitors suffer agonies of stress and nerves. But it's extremely hard work, sitting what can be 8, 9, even 10 hours a day, listening to the piano, trying to remain objective and alert for everyone. Of course, competitors want and need to show the extent of their technical, intellectual powers. But if programs are unrelieved in their intensity and all impressive, it can make for very, very wearing listening. So don't underestimate the value sometimes of moments of sheer beauty, simplicity, or even shock horror humour. I've seen a jury noticeably breathe differently at such an offering. I remember well in Leeds, we'd had a succession of Dante sonatas, Mephisto waltzes, Seventh Prokofievs and Petrushkas, and somebody came on and started his programme with I think 2 or 3 of those charming early Ligeti Musica Ricercata, that lovely witty number 3, and the teasing little waltz. And the Clyburn, when the second Rachmaninoff sonata was preceded by that serene and exquisite Liszt transcription of Schubert's Litany, the jury felt good, almost ready to face another Rachmaninoff sonata. Try to think of the jury simply as you would an audience. Sometimes tease them, play with their emotions, as well as seeking to impress them. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of repertoire. One I think wonderful, the other I thought unsuccessful. This is Yekwan's son Wu, who won first prize in Clyburn on the year I was in the jury. I thought it showed excellent planning, balance. Round 1, bright, heightened C major sonata, lovely. The commission work by Marc-André Hamelin, which was a wonderful piece, virtuosic and subtle. The spiritual Schubert Litany, and then the powerful Rachmaninoff sonata. Round 2, Schubert's C minor sonata, D958, the great darkest of all the Schubert sonatas, followed by Ravel's La Valse. Totally different, transparent, end of an era music. Third solo round started off with the sublime spirituality of Opus 109, Beethoven. Then the Strauss-Granger ramble on that lovely ramble on the last love duet from Rosenkavalier, which was your light relief. Smile and be charmed and engaged. And then the pianistic warhorse of Prokofiev's Sixth Sonata. By contrast, another nameless competitor, I thought his first round was wonderful, very talented. Chopin Polonaise Fantasy, Scriabin's Sonata, number 3, preceded by that lovely Gluck Scambati melody. So expectations were high for his second round, but it was spoiled, I felt, by a very curiously weak program. Chopin Barcarolle and 2 nocturnes, Opus 62, so Opus 60 and 62, 61 and 62, and the churning Rhoda Variations and Kabalevsky Rondo. Undoubtedly, all the 3 Chopin works are great pieces, but they're too uniform in pacing, all fundamentally quite slow, and 2 of them very slow, giving us almost 20 minutes of such music. Then the Czerny, hardly a masterpiece, but delightful in the hands of Horowitz. And then the Kabalevsky Rondo, which I would not put down in my top 200 works for the piano, but again, it's charming in its own way. His semi-final program would have been the Schubert B-flat Sonata and the Brahms Opus 118. Wonderful, wonderful heavyweight works, 19th century piano works. But such a heavy listen. If he put, say, the Brahms into the second round and put some of the lighter pieces like the Czerny into the third round, we might have had 2 much better balanced programs. And with a big competition like Clyburn, somehow the second round just felt wrong. I, having loved him so much in the first round, felt quite disappointed, almost angry. Why have you disappointed me doing this? Let down by that second round program. So quick other thoughts. Always remember you should never, or you never will get or should get credit just for performing the most difficult program. In fact, the more demanding the work, the higher the expectations of the jury, the greater the disappointments if you don't quite meet their expectation. So the free choice, which so many competitions now have, can be wonderful, or it can be an invitation to hang yourself. It's an invitation to make to show an alarming inability to make sound musical judgments. And we have that just recently in the 30-minute programs for Clyburn pre-selection. So often we hear a performance from a gifted player and we just think, why on earth did they choose to play that piece? Probably you will feel the need or even the compulsory demand to play a classical sonata, maybe Beethoven. So if you have to play Beethoven and you don't think it's your forte, please don't choose Opus 53 or Opus 57. They're usually fairly disastrous unless in really, really wonderful hands, and then of course they're magnificent. Perhaps a short sonata, Opus 78, Opus 90. Opus 10 number 2 is wonderful. Just think, if you have to play your Chopin study, how often do juries have to listen to 10 number 1, 10 number 4, 25 number 11. So maybe some of the more artistically searching ones, like 10 number 10, 10 number 11, 25 number 3 or 4. It was interesting that of all the 72 performers we heard live, in the final stages of the Clyburn pre-selection, we heard almost no Chopin. I think we had one second sonata. The only other Chopin works we heard were Opus 1 and Opus 2. You're talking these early Chopin pieces, which are certainly not his greatest pieces, but delightful in a way. And we heard almost no Mozart. Scary Mozart is. Too risky, they obviously felt. I'm not going to risk Mozart. In major competitions, I've found that Kapustin is almost universally disliked by almost every juror. And curiously, I've never heard a Messiaen regarde l'esprit de joie, however impressive, that advanced to the next round. Now let's get off of it, but those are just a few thoughts, but it's critical. Now the jury, those awful people. There are so many misconceptions about how juries function. Many seem to imagine we're going to smoke-filled rooms. Well, not these days, smoke-filled, I suppose. Have long discussions about philosophical issues in late Beethoven, or that we seek to promote one candidate or another, or indulge in some kind of horse trading. You vote for my student, I'll vote for yours. Basically, that's not how it works, and of course, certainly not how it should work. I can say that in all the competitions I've been a juror, and it's a lot now, I have never ever been approached or seek to be influenced in that way. I'd have to admit that sometimes, yes, I've been conscious of undercurrents, something a little murky happens in groups of jurors. It will happen. It shouldn't. There are rare occasions where someone tries to influence your mind, maybe. I can remember I think it was my second or first competition, which is the first Esslingen competition. I sat next to a very distinguished lady, who will be nameless again, she's long dead. And when someone was playing, she didn't think I should like. She would go, "Ouf, no," an audible stage show, so insupportable. Comment faire comme ça? And she'd look at me to make sure I was listening to her. I wasn't impressed, and nor was the chairman of the jury, I think, because I think he noticed she was never ever invited back, although she had a very distinguished reputation. When I went to the Moscow, on the other hand, when I went to the Moscow Tchaikovsky jury, people said, "Oh, you must be careful of so-and-so. He'll be trying to influence you the whole time." I can say I sat next to this particular juror the whole way through the competition, and not once did he ever try and talk to me about any competitor or try and influence my thinking. We had good chats, sometimes very funny chats, but never about the performers as individuals. And when we do vote, of course, almost virtually never can you vote for your own student. Occasional masterclass or summer course may not count. And the system aims to compensate for this, but it actually involves a slight mathematical disadvantage to your student. Some competitions tell jurors none of their students are permitted to enter. Others write and beg you to encourage their successful, your talented students to enter. By inviting a successful, inverted commas, teacher, they hope to raise the level and perhaps the international profile of their candidates. I'm sure you must realize that there is also great competition between competitions to attract the highest quality of participants. And there are basically two alternative voting systems, points or names. Points, you give a mark, maybe 1 to 25 usually. Names, you simply present a list of however many performers there will be in the next round. As ever, there are pros and cons. With points, it is easier to manipulate the voting. You can't vote for your student, but it is possible, and I have seen it done once, to vote perceived rivals to your student absolutely unduly low, and so try and drag their mark down. I've only seen it once. With names, that risk is removed, but you have to put, say, 24 names down. And inevitably, there are going to be a number that you feel passionately about, you really want to hear again. And maybe one or two you have to put in to make up the numbers, because you've only got 20, and so you're slightly struggling to find the last 2 or the last 3. But of those 20, every name you put down will carry equal weight. So there's something in that system too. Now, integrity. There are, of course, often suggestions, even accusations of dishonesty or favoritism. And inasmuch as it is possible, competitions need not just to do all they can to be fair, but to be seen to be fair. And certain issues are frequently raised. And as ever, nothing is quite as simple as it seems. And more often than not, such accusations are, I'm afraid, probably simply what we call sour grapes on the part of a competitor or supporter. I will say as a juror, I don't expect the public necessarily to agree with my vote. I just want them to believe that I voted with total integrity for the performance I wanted to hear again. So take the frequent suggestion that all jury votes should be publicly announced. At first this seems perfectly reasonable, and I don't personally have an objection to it, but there are risks. For example, you're judging the student of your close colleague, of your head of faculty, of your dean of your university. If you don't like the playing and you feel it deserves a very low mark, how does that put you in terms of your friendship, or maybe even your job? Do you risk it? Or maybe even worse, if you genuinely give a very low mark to someone who people know is not your friend, or is really maybe an unfriend, how will that be perceived? Accusations of bias will rain down upon you. So one should never be in a position of voting and having at the same time to be wondering, how will it look? What will so-and-so think if I do this? Next, the idea that no teacher should sit on a jury where they have a student taking part. This, I find it much easier to be in agreement with this particular suggestion. And in fact, I've been in several competitions where it is absolutely strictly stated you may not have anyone playing in the competition who you've taught within the last 3 years. I think that's fine. And actually, even though you can't vote for them, I prefer this. I don't like listening to my own students in competitions. It just adds an extra level of stress for me as a juror. I've got enough to do with having to get nervous of the student playing. When I was in the Leeds jury last time, a few years ago, there were 6 finalists. 2 were my students. 2 were students of Robert MacDonald from Juilliard. Robert and another had his mentor on the jury. I know I did nothing to try and advance my students, and I regard Robert MacDonald not only as a wonderful musician and teacher, but as a man of total integrity. But it looks bad. As I said earlier, competitions not only need to be fair, but to be seen to be fair. And I've no doubt there were many who looked at these finalists and thought, oh, they've all got teachers on the jury. For me, pleased as I was for my own students, it was an uncomfortable experience. And here's another side to this story. I've already talked about competitions, competing to get the best students. And at times the reaction, not least on social media these days, from teachers can be shocking. I recall once being on a jury where actually I did vote in the second round for the student, or our student, or the jury chairman to proceed. It wasn't the most flawless performance, but musically it spoke to me. It was interesting. In the semi-final, he had, frankly, a disastrous time. It was bad. It was bad. Whether he hadn't expected to get there, or whether he just got consumed by nerves, I don't know. And the teacher of another candidate posted some pretty horrible stuff online about the jury not being impartial, and worse than that, actually put on YouTube recordings of the disastrous moments of his semi-final performance with the label, "Student of Jury Chairman Plays in Semi-Finals of X Competition." I mean, it's unbelievable anyone would do this. It's absolutely disgraceful, it's shameful. But it certainly didn't make me question my decision to vote for him to pass to the semis. In that competition, I did also, as it happens, vote for a student of the chairman to get first prize. Not to please the chairman, to be re-invited on his jury, but because he simply, in my view, was the best. So as jurors were often asked, my last little point, I had this inclination, what do you look for? We were on a kind of, the five of us were a kind of big, couple of hundred people there. What are you looking for when you're listening to candidates? I try to define, it's very hard. And this is what it comes down to, what's the jury looking for? In the previous Clyburn, one candidate was knocked out in the first round, and she was interviewed in the papers, and she petulantly said, well, of course, you just don't know what juries look for these days. What do I look for? I think above all, it's simply someone who I positively want to hear again. And what's that? It's someone who speaks to me. A pianist is like a great actor. They're the conduit through which the music or words of a great composer or writer is communicated to the audience. And the greater the music or the play, the more potential there is for that particular performer, not just to be respectful to the score and the composer, but to show a clear identity of themselves as a performer. It might have little relationship to my preconceptions of that work, if I have any, but it has to be alive and to speak and to be convincing. And of course, in order to do so, a wonderful technical command of the instrument and its broadest potential are absolutely essential. Technical insecurity deserves the listener and the confidence of the listener as much as it does the performer. An overbalance towards mere respect will result in bland playing. Undue personal gesture or affectation will destroy the essential craft and integrity of the work in question. So, simple, that's what I'm looking for. All right, so there we come. Good luck to you if you are a student, if you're a teacher, if you're just an interested person, if you are friends or family. Good luck to you and any students who venture into this world. Of course, you cannot all be winners, but all best wishes for managing to make this, above all, a positive and productive musical and personal experience. So we can end with a bit of music. Let's go back to Chopin competition in 1965, and hear Martha Argerich playing something very different, the Mazurka Opus 59, number 1.
Well, thank you, Christopher. I thought that was a stimulating, fascinating talk, and I think it'll stay online and be a sort of textbook for all these young pianists when there are all the snags to avoid, when a lot of practical wisdom about how to go about competitions. And I was very taken by your reassurance that all these rumours about things that happen in those smoke-filled rooms are largely unfounded, which is nice to know. I don't know if there are any burning questions from anyone. Roger, do you want to ask a burning question? I have to say, Roger, a very close friend of mine, has sat through 250 people in the Warsaw, was it?
It was 150.
And you heard one piece 50 times?
52 times.
But you weren't there in 1965, so you're arguing there.
That was 2015. Christopher, thank you very much for a fascinating, informative, and indeed entertaining talk. I have just one question. You've obviously been on many, many juries, lots of experience. So the question is, how do you prepare for a competition? Do you look at the history of the competition? Do you research the musical backgrounds of the competitors? Do you read through all the scores of the pieces, or what?
Right.
Thank you.
I actually, if I'm on a competition, some competitions are programs, and in the program it gives you all details of all their teachers, all the prizes they've won, all the things they've achieved. And you're given a copy of the book, because if you're not given it, someone else will have seen it and will tell you. I actually prefer to have two pieces of information: age of the competitor and probably where they come from. I don't want to know that they won this major competition, because it slightly gives you a preconception this is going to be very good. Now, I'm there to listen, as I put it, as a kind of innocent ear, to be there and say, now, what is this doing? If there's a piece coming up I really don't know, I might try to get to know it. But on the other hand, if someone produces a really unknown piece, particularly contemporary, I think it has to be presented in such a way that it talks to you the first time through. If it sounds, what is so incomprehensible modern music, then they either shouldn't play it or they're not playing it very well. So no, on the whole, obviously I know nearly every piece I hear in competitions. I've heard them before, but there are some I don't. But one knows the idiom, and I like to hear pieces I don't know too well, because I talked about the first ballade. How often have I taught the first ballade? I don't know. But it's quite nice to hear, not to hear something you've taught many, many times. No, I don't prepare in advance. Of course, I know the category of competition. I know roughly the expectation of what the level is going to be. I know if I go to Elton, it's some of the most talented young pianists in the world coming, but they are young. Sometimes the younger ones, the under 15 category, are more amazing than the under 20s because of this kind of freshness and innocence. But no, I don't prepare consciously. Yeah, if I'm on Clyburn or Tchaikovsky or Leeds, as I've been, you know, these are some of the biggest competitions in the world, and the expectation is that. And some competitions, they insist you have a first prize. Some you don't. You first decide, is there a first prize? And that's when you're really looking at the stature of the competition. No, I don't do homework. I don't research every competitor. I rather, as I say, come like an innocent ear. I can see in the program what they're going to play. It's very tempting to look ahead and see, what is this next round going to be? What are they going to play in the semi-final? What's their concerto? It's very tempting to do it, and I can't pretend I've never done it. But in a way, it's immaterial. Even if I think, I really want to hear Brahms too, or I don't want to hear Brahms too from this competitor, it doesn't affect the voting.
Other questions from the audience?
I don't really need the microphone. I do.
You do really.
Yeah. Christopher, that was fantastic and extremely interesting. One question that I have is, how often do you find it that you sort of change your mind from what you feel after 2 or 3 minutes about somebody playing? Because I often find myself, I get a very early impression and you're sort of drawn in, and that's the way you feel. Now clearly you've had situations where the repertoire's been bad second time round from first time. Yeah. But I just wonder if your sort of view can change as a pianist plays, or whether that early impression is one of the most important things.
Well, the early impression clearly is very important because it does affect you. But I can definitely remember times when I've heard someone who the first page or two I thought, gosh, this is really not going to be interesting at all. And then as it goes on, you think, actually, I think I'm wrong. I think this is very interesting. And so you have absolutely to keep an open mind about it. Equally, someone may play a first piece, play 3 different pieces, and their Haydn sonata is stupendous, and other things, the romantic music just isn't. So yeah, both the fact that different repertoire they play may have different qualities, and you've got to, especially in a big competition, see how they have the ability to present different styles of music right the way through the competition. But even within one piece, I can remember vividly a performance she started, and I thought, oh, well, this is going to be not very good. And then I probably didn't listen very carefully for a couple of minutes, and then after a couple of minutes, I said, hang on a second, this is actually very interesting. So the beginning wasn't very good, but now they're really into it. It's, and equally, of course, sometimes the beginning is, wow, and then, oh, what a pity they can't keep it up. No, you're absolutely right. They haven't. And it is very easy, particularly if you're listening to online, I think, or recorded submissions, if something is really not good at the beginning. It's like in a performance, if you're giving a concert. If the beginning is flat and bland, you have to really work hard to get your audience back again, don't you? I think competition should be no different from concerts, really.
Other questions? Christopher, do you think it's unfair that so many competitions, most have a concerto round at the end, and it seems that in the final analysis it's between someone playing Beethoven 4 and someone playing Rack 3, and it doesn't take into account how they'd be in a whole recital. In other words, whether the semi-final round is actually a better guide to their all-round abilities.
I think in most competitions, you don't specifically vote round by round. Of course you vote, and each round is more important than the previous one. But for me, and I've sometimes not maybe agreed with the jurors, if someone's concerto is very, very good, and actually, I can remember one occasion where the concerto was wonderful, but I hadn't voted for them even to go from first to second or finals. And I couldn't, in all honesty, give that person the first prize. I would have given them the first prize for the concerto, but not for the whole competition. But in a big competition, in Clyburn again, is a prime example, if you get to the final, you have probably played 2.5, 3 hours of music already to get there. And some competitions, of course, have 2 concertos, so you have 1 classical. Some competitions you have a choice. I know it's difficult. How do you equate a great performance of Beethoven 4 or Schumann with Brahms 2 or Rack 3? I think you just have to accept they are different performances. So was this performance of Rachmaninoff third a better performance of Rachmaninoff third than that performance of Bach D minor was? Or whatever, you know what I mean. I'm exaggerating a little. So it is very difficult. But yeah, it's not as bad as when you get competitions where they have winners of each section, and then suddenly the winners of the pianist and the violinist and the singer and the woodwind player have to play. And that, I think, is a nightmare. I think so.
Other questions?
So I don't need the microphone.
Yeah, please do, Angela.
Okay.
Just for me.
Broadcast to the world.
I'd like to throw out a comment from another adjudicator, and that was the dramatic soprano Eva Turner, who adjudicated many Royal Overseas Leagues and other things.
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Sorry, Eva Turner.
Eva Turner, yes, I knew Eva Turner. I was a student at the Academy. Dame Eva was there.
Yes.
Her voice would thunder down the corridors, rule Britannia, yes.
Who adjudicated many Royal Overseas Leagues.
Yes, of course.
She was the chair of the adjudicators
Yes.
there. Her sort of all-encompassing phrase was, always watch the one who comes second. What would you say about that?
Oshida didn't do very badly, did she? She was second at least. No, I mean, I think you watch them all. Yes, but of course, this is the other thing. I've got someone doing a competition at the moment, and I said, look, just remember that what happens for you personally in this competition is not a definitive judgment on you as a musician. The first person and the second person. Very often, somebody sometimes wins a competition because no one dislikes their playing. so everyone quite likes it, and someone else, some people feel passionately about, and some just don't like at all. That person cannot win the competition. So it's only a judgment on how that particular voting system arrived on that particular occasion with those jurors and that one performance. It's not saying this performer is a greater musician than this one. Yeah. So it could be second, it could be fifth. Schiff was fifth. He's not bad.
Actually, I mean, that is one of the criticisms put forward, that there is such a thing as a competition pianist who plays right down the middle, won't offend anybody, pretty bland but safe, and it's all secure.
I've been in competitions where that person has won, and I haven't voted for them. There have been competitions, usually I've been absolutely delighted in the winner. Sometimes not, but I don't expect the jury all to agree with me. But yes, that is the risk, that the kind of inoffensive one, who of course is extremely professional, will come out on top because they've never, so to speak, put a foot wrong and never offended anyone.
Any other questions? Roger.
Yeah.
Obviously, the number of jurors in a competition varies enormously. I mean, the big one, Warsaw, 25 or so. Yes. Some of the other ones, 7, maybe 5. As a juror, what are the dynamics sitting on those sort of different juries? Is it much more difficult if you're on the big Warsaw jury or Clyburn than a small one?
I honestly cannot see the point in having a jury of 25 people. It seems to me just, I don't know, I can't understand the rationale behind it. I think the biggest I've been on, I think Moscow was about 11 or 13. Clyburn, what was it, about 9, was it? 9 or 11. I'm in Dublin soon, I think that's 8, 9, something like that. I think, but there's no, if it's a very small jury, then of course you get to know everyone, you talk. I mean, normally jurors, you are not meant to discuss anything with each other. I have to say, if you're there for over 2 weeks, hearing performances, and you get to know people very well, it's almost impossible not to talk about something, but never in a way that's saying, I know more about this, you should agree with me. It's just sometimes one say, oh, wonderful to hear that piece, or I really like that one. Oh, did you? Fine, that's fine, finish, end of conversation. Sometimes jurors, I mean, the pre-selection for Clyburn, there were 5 of us, and it was such a happy jury. It really was. Perhaps because we didn't have to pick our winner, but we had to pick the 30 to go through. I was also, one jury I was on, again, the place and the person will be immaterial, will be not mentioned, but one of the jury did not like the choice of semi-finalists. And he or she decided in the whole of the next day to sit and have every meal at a table apart from the rest of the jury. Her or his loss, I think, rather than ours. But I mean, that is just, if you can't take it, then don't do the job. Don't do it. We all have things we get upset about and things we like. It's not worth it.
Christopher, how about the sort of selection of the jury vis-a-vis inclusion of conductors or administrators or other folks? There is a feeling that's put forward occasionally that we pianists lot don't take such a broad view, and you need a musician to...
As opposed to a pianist, you mean?
Yes. Something like that, but
yes.
This crops up occasionally.
No, it does. I think there's room for both. But I have been in a jury when there was a singer there who was an absolute nightmare. It really was, just was obsessed about one thing. He wanted all the solo pianists to sound like good accompanists. I've been in a jury when Hans Keller was a wonderful juror for many years on Leeds competition, head of music at BBC. But people with a real experience of performing and assessing performances, very fine agents too, can be very good in a competition. And not least because if the agents, if they like people, they can help to promote them and give them work. I think the balance must be carefully chosen. Composers can be very good too. I mean, Marc-André Hamblin was on the Clyburn jury, but of course he's also a fine pianist, and he'd written the set piece as well. But I think conductors I think are very good to have in a jury. Difficult to have the conductor on the jury if he's conducting the final, because then they can't really be doing two jobs at once.
Yes.
Thank you. You did say often a career is made very well without the effect or the help of having won a competition. And I watched a programme on television the other day which was the best of BBC pianists. And one of the people on was Lang Lang. And his facial expressions and the way he behaved at the piano, I wasn't really very happy about it at all. And
I
yet,
can only say no comment.
I'm
I'm not going to go down that line.
He at the moment has got a really big reputation, and yet I think you mentioned he hasn't figured in any
No.
competitions particularly.
Lang Lang is a huge talent. Whether you like his playing or not, or like his facial expressions, is another matter. I actually gave Lang Lang a lesson once in Beijing when I think he was about 9. He was about to go off and play the junior Tchaikovsky competition in Tokyo. And I remember he played Beethoven Opus 7 to me, the first movement. It was absolutely wonderful, amazing playing. And of course, none of that going on then. And in fact, he won the competition. And when he played in Esslingen, when he was, I think, 10 or 11, it was just, I remember the Liszt Tarantella was phenomenal, the charisma of it. But yeah, but I'm not going to go down the line of, in public, saying whether I like Lang Lang's face.
That was very diplomatic. Any other questions? I think this has been an absolutely wonderful session, Christopher. Thank you very much indeed. And I think it'll stay online, and all people, all sorts of young pianists particularly, will come back to it as a sort of reference point on all the ups and downs of competitions and so forth. And I think it was masterly, and your amazing experience over so many years in so many competitions with so many wonderful pianists. It's been wonderful. Thank you very much.
If I just say that, I think one of the best thing of all is the music you heard. Because you hear how through competitions there is some absolutely wonderful playing. I mean, that Argerich, who plays a phenomenal study with virtuosity, and then that Mazurka with such intimacy and such freedom for a young person to understand this subtle music. Anyway, they're all great artists, and we do hear great artists in competitions, and that's the best bit of it.
Well, thank you once again, and I'm going to ask the audience here to put their hands together. I'd also like to thank our technical team, because it's quite complicated putting on excerpts for both the audience here in the church and audience at home. So we have Andrew Wagcoat doing the sound and Rob Jenkins doing the vision. And I'm very grateful to both of them. But I'm very, very grateful to you, Christopher, for coming along and giving such a wonderful talk. I must say, we've had at least 20 of your pianists give recitals here. Some of the best pianists, too. It's been wonderful. So if I can ask the audience to put their hands together. And if you've enjoyed the talk at home, you might like to go to our PayPal facility on the website and donate. So we always pay our musicians. And thank you very much for being with us, and a very good afternoon to you from West London. Thank you.